wind howled through pillars of white stone, carrying the weight of whispers older than time itself. Beneath the cracked dome of an ancient temple, a pool of water trembled, catching the dim light of a dying torch. Shadows leaned inward, as if the world itself bent to listen. Somewhere within that endless silence, the universe exhaled, and destiny took shape. A drop of water fell. Ripples spread like rings of fate, widening into the reflection of a child's face. His eyes, unformed yet ancient, shimmered with an intelligence that didn't belong to mortals. The high priest, alone in the sanctum, saw the vision, but couldn't comprehend what he had called upon. His hands shook, though the air around him was still. The image in the water smiled an expression so human, yet so divine it tore the balance between worlds. The flame beside him flickered, bent backward, and died. Outside, the earth sighed. Trees twisted in their roots, birds fell silent mid-flight, and the stars above flickered as if unsure whether to shine. The night wasn't just dark, it was aware. It stared back. Somewhere between heaven and soil, something had shifted, and though no god dared speak of it, they all felt it. A heartbeat too loud, a future too bright. In the days that followed, the temples cracked from within. Statues of gods wept a black fluid, thick as oil. The people called it a curse. The priests called it a sign. But no one understood that what had been born wasn't a child of men, nor one of Olympus. It was something in between, a convergence of human will and divine fear, a presence that neither realm could contain. The oceans churned without wind. Animals refused to feed. Infants across distant lands awoke at once, screaming into the night. And within that same hour, the oracle of Alestra dreamt of a son bleeding into the sea. When she woke, her tongue was ash, her eyes pale as marble. She wrote only one word on the walls before collapsing into silence: return. But return from where? No scroll told the story, no god admitted to knowing, yet across the divine halls, the same feeling coiled through the air, a tremor in eternity. The gods felt fear, not for the mortals, nor for their power, but for something far worse, the possibility that fate itself had been rewritten without their consent. Lightning tore across a cloudless sky. Time hesitated. In the mortal realm, a mother clutched her newborn beneath the ruins of a storm-struck village. She couldn't explain why she was trembling, only that every breath from the infant carried the scent of rain before thunder. The child's skin was warm as dawnlight, and when he opened his eyes for the first time, the clouds above stopped moving. The world didn't know his name yet, but eternity already did. The days after his birth blurred into a fog that refused to lift. No one spoke of the storms that tore through villages or the temples that sank into the sea. The priests sealed their mouths with sacred ash, as if the act of naming what had happened would summon it again. But the silence spread faster than belief. It became a presence, thick and suffocating, a second skin draped over the world. Even the wind seemed afraid to carry words. Somewhere in the mountains, a monastery of forgotten scholars recorded the strange signs. Their parchment described suns that rose without warmth, moons that bled into daylight, and rivers that ran backward for a single night. Each account ended the same way. The balance has shifted, but no one could tell in which direction. The stars offered no guidance. Constellations fractured, rearranging into patterns unrecognized by any mortal eye. The heavens themselves were rewriting their script. As the boy grew, the world around him seemed caught between awe and decay. Crops withered at his touch, yet the soil beneath him pulsed with life. Animals followed him to the edge of forests, but never dared cross his shadow. He did not speak, yet his gaze bent the air. When he slept, dreams spilled outward, forming shapes of fire and mist that lingered long after dawn. Villagers whispered that his name could not be uttered without consequence, so they called him the Quiet One, a title that felt both fearful and reverent. One night, the horizon tore open in a line of pale gold. It wasn't dawn, it was something older, deeper, a memory of the first light. Every surface reflected it, Oceans gleamed, mountains glowed, and the sky seemed to inhale. In that moment, the boy's heartbeat aligned with the pulse of the earth. The ground trembled, not in destruction but in recognition. The universe remembered him, and for a single heartbeat, forgot the gods. Far above, in a place beyond stars, the immortals gathered. They felt the ripple in their veins, the echo of something not made by divine hands. Their thrones of light dimmed. For the first time since creation, uncertainty invaded the immortal mind. The god of thunder raised his eyes toward the mortal plane and saw not a child, but a reflection, an echo of power that should not exist. They argued in silence, their thoughts heavy enough to shift constellations, yet no decree could undo what had been born. Back on Earth, the boy stood beneath a tree that bloomed in winter. Its petals were transparent, humming with invisible energy. The air around him shimmered, warping the world like heat rising from stone. He looked upward, toward the unseen heavens, and though he had no words, the gesture itself became a question that pierced eternity. That night, the moon hid its face, not from shame, but from anticipation. Something was stirring beneath the surface of creation, a rhythm older than time, now awake again. The child's breath fogged the air, and each exhale whispered across realities, reaching the ears of those who had forgotten how to listen. The silence broke. It did not shatter. It unraveled. And as it did, the gods felt it, an ancient boundary weakening, a thin thread between divinity and mortality, snapping one invisible strand at a time. What had begun as a ripple in a temple pool was now a tide, rising toward the heavens, inevitable and soundless. The boy's shadow stretched across the earth. Though the sun was gone, it reached toward mountains, oceans, and the forgotten ruins of time. The world was not ending, it was remembering how it began. The seasons no longer followed reason. Spring and winter tangled together in confusion, birthing storms of petals and frost. The villagers whispered that the boy carried both creation and collapse inside his chest, that every heartbeat wrote and erased reality in the same instant. They avoided his path, but built shrines from a distance, hoping reverence could tame whatever lived behind his calm eyes. Yet he seemed untouched by the fear that spread like mist around him. He wandered through forests that bent to make way for his steps, walked across rivers that thickened beneath his feet, and slept where no creature dared to rest. Each morning the world awoke differently. Mountains moved, slightly, as though the earth adjusted to his presence. The constellations realigned nightly, stars rearranging themselves into symbols no scholar could decipher. Somewhere deep within the cosmic design, a pattern was forming, a code written not in words, but in existence itself. The boy was its center, unaware of the prophecy that had named him the end of divine order. Across the divine veil, the gods convened once more. Their gathering was not of thunder or fire, but of dread. They spoke without sound, their will shaping the air like invisible tremors. None would admit fear, yet all felt it, a weight pressing behind their immortal thoughts. The youngest among them saw visions of temples sinking beneath oceans of light, of time folding upon itself until all eras bled into one endless moment. The oldest looked into the infinite and found no reflection staring back. Among mortals, myths began to mutate. Stories of the boy spread beyond language. Some said he could heal the dying. Others claimed his shadow consumed souls. Mothers told his tale to silence their children at night, while priests carved warnings into stone. But over time, fear gave way to fascination. Artists painted his likeness in secret, using ashes and starlight. The lines they drew trembled as if the image itself resisted being captured. The boy's awareness deepened. He began to feel the heartbeat beneath the ground, the slow, resonant thrum of a planet trying to speak. He could sense storms before they formed, hear thoughts before they were born. When he breathed, mountains exhaled mist in response. It was not power he sought, but understanding, though he could not name what he searched for. The world around him became a reflection of his thoughts, bending and folding like a dream shaped by an unseen hand. One evening, As twilight bled across the sky, he reached the edge of an ancient crater, a scar left from a forgotten war between the stars. The air shimmered with memory. Here, the gods had once descended to mold humankind from dust and flame. He stood at its center, the ground humming beneath his feet, and for the first time, the earth spoke back. Not with words, but with resonance and echo vibrating in every particle, whispering that the beginning was never meant to end. Far above, lightning cracked, though there were no clouds. The gods watched from their sanctuaries, unable to intervene. They saw their creation rise beyond their reach, the design slipping from their divine grasp like sand from a clenched fist. And though they still ruled the heavens, they could no longer command the silence that now obeyed the boy instead. Night fell like a curtain of liquid glass. The stars flickered, uncertain whether to reveal or conceal what they had witnessed. Beneath their trembling light, the boy closed his eyes. The pulse of the world slowed to match his breath. In that stillness, reality hesitated, balanced between divinity and oblivion, waiting to see which one he would choose. The choice, however, had already been made long before he was born. The universe simply hadn't realized it yet. The fourth dawn, since the silent convergence, rose without color. Light spilled across the world like dust, thin and uncertain, as though it had forgotten its purpose. Birds sang out of rhythm, their calls warped by an invisible pulse. Beneath the pale sky, the boy wandered through ruins veiled in mist, fragments of a forgotten age where marble gods once stood unshaken. The air held memory. Every breath carried the taste of burnt offerings and vanished prayers. It was here, amid the bones of devotion, that he began to understand that the divine was not immortal, it was decaying quietly from within. The ground beneath him hummed in slow, irregular waves, as if echoing the exhaustion of creation itself. Rivers no longer followed their paths. They curved toward him, drawn by a magnetic sorrow. The boy's shadow wavered, not bound to the sun, but to the heartbeat of the planet. Each step he took left no footprint, yet the earth remembered him. Trees leaned in his direction, their branches stretching like hands seeking warmth. Their leaves whispered stories from the age before language, tales of the first spark, when existence was a choice and silence still had form. Above, the gods watched from their luminous halls. They could not comprehend the paradox forming below. He was neither threat nor savior, yet both outcomes bloomed within him. One god sought to descend, to end the anomaly before it grew, but found their will met by stillness. The path between realms had hardened, sealed by something older than faith. They felt it then. The boundary had become conscious, aware of its purpose, loyal not to them, but to the child who had never prayed. The boy reached the remnants of a temple split by lightning. Between its broken columns lay an altar made of obsidian glass, reflecting a sky that no longer matched the one above. He placed his hand upon its surface, and visions rippled outward, centuries collapsing, stars being born and dying in silence, civilizations repeating their mistakes like echoes lost in infinity. He saw the faces of those who had worshipped, begged, created, and destroyed, all believing they were part of a divine plan. Yet behind it all, he sensed absence. No hand-guided fate, no voice whispered destiny. The order the gods claimed was merely the reflection of their fear. The realization rippled through him like fire through mist. His body did not burn, but the world around him did. The air shimmered, the clouds above twisted into spirals of light and shadow. Across distant lands, sleepers dreamed of the same moment, a boy touching a mirror of darkness that reflected their forgotten truths. Some woke in tears, others in silence, but none remembered why. The tremor of awakening passed from soul to soul, a chain of remembrance unspoken yet absolute. The gods felt the change too. One by one, their symbols dimmed. Statues turned to dust, hymns lost their rhythm. They reached into the mortal realm to reclaim their dominion, only to find their power dissolving into memory. Each attempt to intervene fed the erosion. They were not being destroyed, they were being remembered differently, It was not rebellion, it was rewriting. The boy lifted his gaze to the heavens. The sky bent under his stare, constellations folding like parchment. The stars blinked in confusion, their paths redrawn by an unseen geometry. For a moment, everything stood perfectly still, no wind, no breath, no time. The pulse beneath creation hesitated, as if awaiting command. Then, with a sound too low to be heard, the world exhaled, and in that breath, something ancient awoke, not divine, not mortal, but the echo of existence remembering itself. The next night fell heavy, not with darkness, but with a strange luminescence that clung to every surface. Mountains glowed from within, and the sea shivered as if it remembered being sky. The boys stood on a plain of blackened grass, watching the horizon twist into shapes that were neither land nor cloud. The world seemed to breathe around him, slow, vast, and uncertain. Somewhere above that trembling horizon, the heavens began to fracture. The sound was not thunder, but a deep, low resonance, like glass cracking in slow motion. The gods felt it first. The golden halls that once stretched endlessly across eternity began to pulse like wounded hearts. Fractures of light rippled through the marble sky, and with every pulse, a piece of divinity fell away. They tried to summon their power, to bind their realm with the laws they had written themselves, but those laws no longer obeyed them. Their words dissolved into silence before they reached the edges of their thrones. Even their thoughts echoed back, distorted, reflected in shapes that did not belong to their will. On earth, mortals sensed the tremor in dreams. Some woke screaming, others spoke prophecies in their sleep. Oceans withdrew for hours, exposing forgotten ruins older than any scripture. Lightning flashed beneath the surface of the water, illuminating sculptures of beings no myth had ever named. The world was remembering pieces of itself that had been erased by divine decree. Every hidden truth began to crawl back into existence, and the boy, standing motionless, became its anchor. He looked toward the sky, where cracks of golden light spread like veins through a dying body. For the first time, he felt the weight of what had been set in motion. It wasn't power, it was consequence. The gods had built eternity upon denial, suppressing the first chaos to create the illusion of order. Now that illusion was peeling away. Beneath it lay the truth. The universe was not ruled by gods, but by memory itself. Every act, every breath, every forgotten thought echoed forever, reshaping the fabric of creation with each remembrance. A wind rose without direction. It carried whispers of names that had never been spoken aloud, the tones of languages older than time. They wound around the boy like threads of invisible silk, pulling him toward the source of the fracture. His heart beat once, twice, and the world shifted. Mountains flattened, seas reversed, stars spun backward into spirals of blinding white. He was now moving through space. The universe was folding around him, rearranging its design to follow his thought. In the realm above, the gods gathered in desperation. One attempted to descend, to sever the connection between mortal and eternal. But as their essence touched the mortal plane, it unraveled into dust. The more they fought the collapse, the faster it spread. Their light flickered, dimmed, and broke into fragments that drifted like dying embers across the void. The concept of divinity itself began to lose coherence, scattering into the minds of mortals like sparks seeking a place to hide. The boy reached the border between the two realms, a place without form, where time did not pass but hovered like breath before exhale. Before him stretched the remnants of heaven, shattered pillars of radiance, fragments of constellations still glowing faintly, and the echo of 1,000 unspoken prayers. It was beautiful in its ruin, like a mirror that had broken just enough to reveal what lay behind the reflection. He stepped forward, and the space around him quivered. The remnants of light recoiled, forming a halo of resistance. Yet resistance required fear, and he carried none. The moment his foot touched the threshold, the barrier dissolved. The boy entered the place of beginnings, and for the first time since the dawn of time, the gods bowed not from reverence, but from terror. The heavens were not falling, they were awakening. The broken firmament drifted like an ocean of glass, each fragment reflecting a memory the world had tried to bury. In the spaces between those fragments, something shimmered, threads of light, twisting together, forming visions of lost beginnings. The boy moved through them, as though through mist, his steps sending ripples across realities. Wherever he passed, stars reignited, burning with unfamiliar colors, deep greens, silver reds, and blues so ancient they seemed to hum with language. He felt none of their heat, only the vibration of their stories. Each one whispered not of worship but of rebellion. There had been others before him, echoes of mortals who had reached too high, seeking the truth behind the veil. But those attempts were brief, erased by divine fear. Their names had been forgotten, their souls scattered across time, yet now their fragments stirred. Within the falling pieces of heaven he saw faces flicker, human and divine intertwined, each glowing for a heartbeat before dissolving into the void. The boy understood then that he was not alone in his creation. He was the culmination of everything the gods had silenced. The air around him thickened. What remained of the divine realm began to distort, bending like molten metal under unseen pressure. The palaces of gold wept light that flowed downward, dissolving into the fabric of the mortal world. The two realms were merging, not in violence but in recognition. The sky no longer belonged solely to the gods, nor the earth to humankind. The boundary that had kept them apart for eons became transparent, pulsing softly like the surface of a waking dream. The boy raised his gaze, and for the first time the gods saw his eyes. They were not human, they were the reflection of existence before the first sunrise. They saw themselves within him, their origins, their lies, their mortality disguised as eternity. Each god felt the burn of remembrance. Their forms wavered, shedding centuries of illusion until they stood not as omnipotent beings, but as fragments of thought ideas too long worshipped, now collapsing under their own weight. Below, mortals looked to the heavens and saw the light rain down in sheets of silent fire. It was not destruction but transformation. The flames did not consume, they revealed. Mountains glowed with inscriptions unseen since creation. Rivers illuminated their own currents, and the night sky unfolded into an infinite spiral that bled into every horizon. People wept without knowing why. The gods had not died, they had returned to where they began, the collective memory of life itself. The boy reached the center of what had once been Olympus. The air trembled, thick with energy older than time. Every breath he took sent waves through existence, harmonizing the chaos into rhythm. Beneath his feet, the ground turned to glass, reflecting both heaven and earth as one endless surface. His reflection moved a heartbeat later, like time lagging behind truth. In that mirrored silence, he felt the first true pulse of creation, the sound the universe made before gods, before men, before thought. It was not music, not noise, but understanding itself. He saw then that divinity was not a crown to be worn, but a memory to be endured. The gods had feared him because he was their reflection stripped of grandeur, the reminder that eternity required impermanence to exist. The remnants of heaven continued to fall, slower now, like snow settling over a forgotten battlefield. The boy closed his eyes. The world exhaled again, softer this time, and the flames that once illuminated the sky receded into the soil. Silence followed, vast and patient. From that silence came a new sound, heartbeat layered upon heartbeat, mortal and immortal blending into one steady rhythm. Creation was not ending, it was beginning again from the center of everything that had been broken. And at its center stood the child the gods had feared, not as a destroyer, but as the memory of fire that would never fade. The night that followed had no edges. It was not darkness, but an endless twilight, suspended between existence and memory. Every horizon dissolved into itself, and the air felt heavy with the scent of rain that would never fall. The boy stood at the junction of everything that was left: sky, sea, earth, and the whisper of time, watching as fragments of heaven settled into the soil like seeds. Where each fragment touched, light grew roots, pulsing slowly, breathing as though alive. Creation was planting itself again. He inhaled deeply, and the wind answered. It carried traces of voices once divine, now faded into elements. The laughter of water gods became rivers. The sighs of lost muses turned into wind. The rage of fallen titans echoed through distant thunder. Everything that had once ruled was now part of the quiet rhythm beneath his feet. The boy could feel their essence inside him, not as power but as memory, a collection of echoes stitched into his existence. He did not command them, he remembered them. That remembrance alone kept them alive. The mortals below began to change. Without knowing why, they moved in harmony with the pulse of the world. Dreams deepened, no longer bound by time or fear. Sleepers drifted into landscapes that shimmered with golden mist, where mountains breathed and rivers spoke in silent tones. None of them awoke the same. They carried fragments of forgotten understanding, a peace that felt both terrifying and familiar. It was as if the world had whispered directly into their souls, reminding them they were part of something vast, something awake. The boy walked across plains that no longer obeyed geography. Valleys folded into skies, clouds solidified into bridges of glass. He felt neither hunger nor fatigue. His body had become an idea, woven from light and the residue of countless prayers. The silence that had once frightened mortals now guided him, shaping his path. With each step he saw glimpses of what had been before the first dawn, pure potential, raw and unclaimed, waiting for thought to sculpt it again. Above him, the sky began to move differently. Stars flowed like rivers, swirling toward a single unseen center. They converged into a spiral, a slow and deliberate rotation that pulled all of creation into rhythm. The gods, those who remained, watched from the edges of fading constellations. Their forms flickered, uncertain. They no longer remembered whether they had created this cosmos or been created by it. One by one, they dissolved into the spiral, their light absorbed into the continuum that had birthed them. The divine no longer stood apart. It became part of the song. The boy reached a place where the air shimmered like heat over sand. There was no horizon, no above or below, only vibration. It felt like standing inside a heartbeat. He realized that this was the true core, the breath between one world ending and another beginning. He closed his eyes, and in that instant, every life, every memory, every forgotten dream surged through him. He saw empires rise and vanish, oceans form and recede, stars ignite and fade. He saw the gods as children of that same endless cycle, afraid to let go of their own reflection. He exhaled. The spiral slowed, the rhythm steadied, time found its pulse again. When he opened his eyes, the universe had changed. The sky was softer, tinted with the color of dawn that had never existed before. The earth hummed beneath a new frequency, as though tuned to the quiet understanding of what had just been remembered. He looked at his hands, not flesh, not light, but a shimmer between both. The boy smiled, not out of triumph, but recognition. He understood then. He was not born to rule nor to end. He was born to remind the cosmos of its own breath. And as that realization settled, the twilight deepened, gentle and infinite, carrying within it the promise of beginnings yet to dream themselves awake. The next dawn came soundlessly, spreading across the reborn world like a memory returning to form. The light was different now, warmer, slower, carrying the shimmer of something alive. Mountains gleamed as though breathing, oceans glowed from beneath, and the air tasted faintly of metal and rain. Above all of it, the sky did not rest. It pulsed, as if aware of being watched. The stars had not vanished. They merely lingered beneath the veil of daylight, waiting for darkness to remember them again. The boy walked through fields where grass bent without wind. The ground was soft, almost liquid, and each step released faint echoes, tones that hung in the air before fading into silence. The world was still unstable, reshaping itself through memory. He could feel every thought that had ever existed drifting through the ether. Prayers, regrets, laughter, promises. They swirled like dust motes caught in sunlight, returning to the cycle from which they'd been banished. Everything was finding its place again, but not as it had been. This was not restoration, it was reinvention. As he moved, he passed remnants of divine relics scattered across the landscape. Broken crowns that no longer shone, blades that hummed softly as if mourning their purpose, fragments of marbled faces eroded into anonymity. These relics were not dead, they were dreaming. The boy could feel their faint pulse beneath the dust, fragments of belief still clinging to existence. When he touched them, light rippled outward, and visions flared for an instant, scenes of worship, conquest, and silence before dissolving back into nothing. Every object carried the residue of a forgotten god, yet none demanded remembrance. In the distance, a city shimmered on the horizon. It was not built but grown, its towers formed from crystallized air and reflected sound. It drew him forward, and as he approached, he realized it was empty. Streets hummed faintly, as though echoing footsteps from another time. The architecture bent subtly, changing shape as he moved, responding to thought more than presence. It was a city without inhabitants, built by the memory of civilization itself. He understood it was a mirror, a construct reflecting what the mortal world believed it had lost. Above the silent spires, the sleepless sky rippled. Stars began to emerge even under daylight, forming patterns that shifted too quickly for eyes to follow. They spiraled toward a point far beyond comprehension, an unseen center that seemed to draw not light but meaning. The boy felt the pull deep within his chest. Every beat of his heart resonated with the slow turning of that cosmic spiral. He knew it wasn't summoning him, it was answering him. The gods who had once watched him were now only fragments within the rhythm. Their consciousness had dissolved into the architecture of existence, yet their essence still lingered. He could sense them in the elements, the flicker of fire, the patience of stone, the quiet persistence of water. They had not perished, they had been absorbed. The divine was now everywhere, diffused into the simplest forms. The boy realized he was surrounded by immortality disguised as matter. A tremor passed through the ground, deep and low, like the world drawing its first breath after a long dream. The horizon bent, light curving inward. He tilted his head and saw reflections in the air, ghosts of potential futures. In one, humanity walked beside the remnants of gods, neither ruling nor ruled. In another, silence reclaimed everything, turning existence into a single unbroken hum. The possibilities overlapped, flickering like candle flames. The boy did not choose. Choice was the language of the old world. He only breathed, and the vision steadied. Reality flowed again, smooth and calm. The sleepless sky stilled its motion, as if soothed by the rhythm of his breath. Night began to fall, though the sun refused to disappear. Its light dimmed into amber, stretching across the horizon until it looked like the earth itself was glowing. For the first time, the boy felt peace not as stillness but as continuity. The universe was no longer asking for control, it was asking to be remembered. And through him it would be. Night returned with a softness the world had never known. It moved like breath across a sleeping face, slow and alive. Stars emerged in their new geometry, no longer bound to constellations but to pulse. They flickered in rhythm with the earth itself, their light descending in waves that brushed the peaks of mountains and the crowns of trees. The sky seemed less like distance and more like reflection, the underside of a sea in which thoughts swam freely. The boy stood within that vast echo, and the silence around him deepened until it began to sing. He followed the sound into the wilderness, where time had not yet settled. The ground shimmered faintly, the soil threaded with veins of pale fire. Each step released faint murmurs, memories of creation still warm beneath the surface. In the hollows of ancient valleys, stones began to vibrate. At first they hummed, then spoke not in words, but in resonance. Their tone was low, continuous, carrying the texture of centuries compressed into one breath. They remembered everything that had ever rested upon them. Feet of gods, tools of men, the fall of light, the passing of seasons. The boy listened. The song of the stones filled him with images instead of sounds. He saw the world as it had been before names, when thought and matter were the same pulse. He saw the first sparks of consciousness ripple through empty skies, drawn to form not out of design but curiosity. Creation had never been commanded, it had been imagined. The realization drifted through him like wind through glass. The gods had merely mistaken imagination for authority. He walked deeper, and the song grew stronger. The air quivered as though charged with static memory. The stones were aligning themselves, forming patterns that glowed in pale symmetry. Circles within circles emerged across the valley floor, an ancient script rewriting itself in light. The boy reached the center and knelt. The glow responded, curling upward into thin threads that twisted around him, drawing lines of light across his skin. For a moment, his body became transparent, filled with constellations. Through him, the stones continued their song, using him as their voice. Mountains responded. From their ridges came a low thunder that wasn't sound but vibration. It rolled across continents, stirring oceans, waking forests. The planet was remembering its own rhythm. In distant villages, sleepers turned in their beds, murmuring the same unspoken phrase, "We were never separate." The chorus spread without direction, a unity without command. The boy rose as the ground trembled beneath him. The circles of light began to collapse inward, merging into a single sphere suspended in the air before him. It pulsed, a miniature sun born from memory. Its glow was soft, silver, neither heat nor cold. He extended his hand, and the sphere drifted closer until it rested just above his palm. Within it, he saw patterns forming, galaxies spiraling inward, stars collapsing and rebirthing in endless cycles. It was the shape of eternity condensed into motion. He understood then that the gods had not created existence. They had merely paused it. They had turned motion into hierarchy, silence into command. What he held in his hand was what they had tried to contain, the perpetual unfolding of everything. The sphere pulsed once more, and the light seeped into his skin, dissolving without pain. He felt its rhythm merge with his heartbeat until the two became indistinguishable. The stones quieted, the valley dimmed, its glow sinking back into the ground like embers cooling after a storm. The air cleared, still humming faintly with residual memory. The boy stood alone again, though the silence no longer felt empty. It was full pregnant with potential, balanced between breath and dream. Above him, the sky trembled briefly, then settled. The stars steadied their pattern, their light now slower, deliberate. The world had exhaled, its song completed, yet lingering like the final note of a hymn that refused to die. The boy looked upward. The heavens no longer seemed distant. They looked like eyes blinking open. The morning did not rise. It unfolded. Light seeped across the landscape in slow ribbons, winding through valleys and drifting over the ocean like smoke. Everything breathed at the same rhythm, the mountains, the air, even the silence between sounds. The boy stood at the threshold of a world that had remembered itself, yet the stillness that surrounded him was not peace. It was hesitation. Creation, aware of its own pulse, waited for what would come next. The weight of the sphere he had absorbed lingered inside him. It did not hurt, but it pressed against his thoughts like a second consciousness, patient and ancient. When he closed his eyes, he saw patterns blooming behind his eyelids, spirals of light, faces of forgotten beings, entire histories playing backward into fragments. They were not visions but consequences. Every echo of divinity that had merged with him was awakening again, trying to remember what it once was. The gods had dissolved into memory, but memory does not rest. It evolves. The air shimmered, and for the first time since the heavens had fallen, a shadow appeared that was not his. It stretched across the ground beside him, moving even when he was still. The light around it bent inward, devoured by its edges. It had no shape, only suggestion, a silhouette of something vast, folded into the form of absence. The boy felt no fear, only recognition. The shadow was not an enemy, it was the remainder of balance. The universe could not awaken without remembering its opposite. The ground trembled lightly. Across the plains, fissures opened, exhaling mist that smelled of iron and rain. From within those cracks rose faint figures made of vapor and light. They were neither ghosts nor gods but remnants, the emotional residue of everything that had ever believed. Their forms changed constantly. One moment a warrior, the next a bird, then a nameless star. They drifted around him in silence, their presence both fragile and infinite. He realized they were memories freed from their stories. They were the cost of awakening, the price of a world that remembered too much. The boy extended his hand, and the figures paused. Their edges wavered, dissolving in and out of sight. They were beautiful, yet unbearable to behold. Each one carried fragments of joy, loss, hunger, love, all that mortals and gods alike had ever felt. They orbited him slowly, as though waiting for permission to return to the void. He did not command them. He simply breathed, and as he did, the figures scattered into the wind, their forms breaking apart into threads of gold that vanished into the soil. When they were gone, the air grew heavier. The shadow beside him deepened, stretching toward the horizon until it touched the edge of the sky. Where it met the light, the world rippled. Day and night overlapped, blending into a single endless dusk. He could feel it inside his veins, the universe adjusting to make room for its reflection. The cost was not destruction, but transformation. In that moment, he understood why the gods had feared him. It was not his power they dreaded, but his stillness, the ability to exist without controlling. He was proof that creation could continue without hierarchy, that the divine order had never been necessary. And yet, as that understanding took root, a faint sorrow spread through him. To awaken the world, something within him had to sleep. The boy closed his eyes. The heartbeat of existence slowed to match his own. Mountains exhaled fog. Oceans folded inward. The stars dimmed slightly, as though bowing in reverence. The shadow beside him began to fade, dissolving into the horizon. It did not vanish, it became everything. He opened his eyes again, and for a heartbeat, the world forgot it had ever been broken. Every sound, every color, every breath aligned in perfect symmetry. The balance had returned, but it was fragile, trembling under its own awareness. The boy felt himself fading into that harmony, not as death, but as translation from being to meaning. The world was awake, but awakening, he realized, is not the end of sleep. It is the dream learning that it dreams. The world no longer measured time in hours or seasons. The passage of existence had softened into something circular, a constant inhalation and exhalation of light. Days bled into nights without warning, and the sky pulsed between gold and violet like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The boy moved through this endless twilight as though he were drifting within the mind of something vast. Wherever he went, the air shimmered with recognition. The earth had begun to dream again, and he was both the dreamer and the dream. Beneath his feet, roots glowed faintly in the soil, weaving intricate patterns that expanded with every step. They pulsed with liquid fire, carrying thoughts rather than nutrients, ideas from the first dawn, still alive and searching for completion. When he knelt and touched the ground, the network responded with a low vibration that resonated through his bones. He could hear whispers, buried deep within the bedrock, voices that spoke not in words, but in pure intention. Remember what you were before names. He rose and walked toward the horizon, where the land rippled like silk. Every movement of his body caused the landscape to respond. Hills bent, rivers changed direction, and forests bloomed from mist, unfolding leaves of translucent light. The world was reshaping itself around awareness, not law. For the first time, creation acted out of curiosity rather than command. It did not ask for worship, it only wanted to continue. Far above, the remnants of constellations flickered faintly. They had once been symbols of power, anchors of divine authority. Now they danced freely, rearranging themselves into new configurations that defied any pattern known to mortals. They were no longer maps of fate, they were expressions of wonder. The gods, now dispersed across the fabric of the cosmos, watched their old emblems dissolve. They could no longer speak, yet their essence smiled through the light. They were not forgotten, they were understood. As he moved through the transforming landscape, the boy felt himself becoming lighter, his body less tethered to form. The line between his thought and the world's response blurred until there was no distinction at all. A mountain rose where he remembered one. Rain fell when he felt sorrow. The universe had become sentient through him, shaping itself not through will but through reflection. And in that realization, a quiet melancholy crept into his awareness. For every beginning there must be forgetting. To hold everything was to dissolve into it. He came upon a plain where glass-like sand shimmered under an unseen moon. The air trembled with a faint hum, the same frequency that once filled the heavens. It was the residue of divinity, echoing faintly through a world that had moved on. He sat there listening. The hum grew softer, then aligned perfectly with his heartbeat. For a moment, he could not tell whether it was within or around him. He was no longer separate from what he observed. He was observation itself. The ground shifted gently, and shapes began to rise, forms sculpted from light and memory. They were not people or gods, but ideas taking shape. Compassion, fear, creation, silence. Each one radiated an emotion so pure it could not be named. They drifted toward him, merging one by one into his being, until he glowed faintly like the horizon at dawn. It did not feel like power, but like completion, the closing of an ancient circle. The earth exhaled, trees bowed, the ocean stilled, the wind folded upon itself and fell quiet. The world had achieved symmetry, if only for a heartbeat. Every atom understood its place. Every sound existed in tune. The boy looked at his hands and saw through them to the stars beyond. He was not dissolving, he was becoming transparent, a window rather than a wall. Through him, existence looked at itself and found peace. He smiled faintly, the gesture soft as the turning of the tide. For the first time since creation began, the universe was silent, not from absence, but from understanding. The silence that followed was not empty, it was dense, alive with unseen motion. It wrapped around the boy like water, neither heavy nor light, carrying the faint scent of beginnings. In that stillness, the edges of existence softened. The mountains lost their weight, the oceans folded into clouds, and the stars blurred into a single unbroken glow. The world was no longer composed of separate things, it had become one breath held between exhale and inhale. The boy stood at the center of that breath, the point where everything paused to remember itself. He felt the pulse of reality beneath his skin, the slow turning of galaxies that once seemed distant but now revolved within him. Every particle of his being vibrated with the rhythm of creation. The horizon that once stretched endlessly before him now curved inward, folding gently until it met his gaze. There was no longer an outside world, only the reflection of consciousness looking back. He moved without direction, his steps weightless, leaving trails of light that lingered for a moment before dissolving into air. The world responded to each motion, not as reaction, but as continuation. He thought of rain, and the sky shimmered. He remembered warmth, and the air glowed like sunset. Everything was thought, everything was memory, and both flowed freely through him. The concept of separation between dream and waking, mortal and divine, had finally disappeared. As he walked, fragments of sound began to rise from the horizon, faint notes, scattered tones that formed no melody yet resonated perfectly with one another. They drifted toward him, weaving around his body like silk. It was the voice of existence, soft, patient, infinite. It sang not of victory or loss, but of balance. Each note carried both creation and destruction, life and decay, joy and sorrow, bound together without contradiction. It was the sound the world made when it forgave itself. The boy listened, and the vibration deepened. It wasn't outside him anymore. It was within his breath, his pulse, the rhythm of his thoughts. He understood that this was the final threshold, not an end but a translation. To cross it was to let go of being a shape in the story and become the story itself. He hesitated, not out of fear, but tenderness. He had seen so much beauty and imperfection, so much meaning in the brief flicker of mortality. To dissolve completely felt like leaving behind the secret that only impermanence could teach. The light around him dimmed, not into darkness but into depth. It felt like falling inward rather than downward, like being carried through layers of memory that no longer belonged to time. Images flickered around him, faces of mortals long gone, their laughter preserved in light. Oceans forming and retreating, stars igniting and cooling, the first spark of awareness echoing into the endless now. None of it was past or future, it was all happening at once, a mosaic of existence seen from the inside. At the core of that mosaic, he saw himself not as a boy, but as a flicker of awareness woven through every heartbeat that had ever existed. He saw himself in the eyes of the gods, in the pulse of the sea, in the silence between thoughts. He realized he had never been separate from any of it. The fear of the divine, the collapse of heaven, the rebirth of the earth, all had been reflections of the same process. The universe learning to see itself clearly. The light pulsed once, slow and soft, like a sigh. He felt his form loosen, threads of his being unraveling gently into the surrounding glow. Yet even as he dissolved, there was no loss. Each fragment became a note in the ongoing song, each heartbeat a ripple in the eternal rhythm. He was not disappearing, he was returning to the horizon, within the place where awareness rests before becoming shape. The silence stretched outward again, vast and endless. Somewhere within it, the first breath of a new world began to form, and it carried his echo. There was no boundary left between thought and space. The last shapes of the world melted into luminosity, a slow wave of colorless fire spreading through everything. The boy drifted within it like a seed suspended in sunlight, no longer bound by direction or gravity. He could not tell if he was rising or descending, only that movement itself had become a kind of listening. Around him, light folded and unfolded, breathing in rhythm with something immeasurably vast. Every particle sang. It was not music in any familiar sense, but a resonance that filled the space where silence once lived. Each vibration carried fragments of memory, the laughter of mortals, the anger of gods, the whisper of wind across untouched stone. These sounds interwove, forming a tapestry that shimmered and pulsed, alive and endless. The boy felt the pattern take hold of him, not as imprisonment, but as recognition. He was the pulse, the vibration, the living interval between all opposites. He extended his hand and saw it ripple into light. The distinction between body and horizon blurred until both were one continuum. He had become the awareness that observed itself, the question and the answer occupying the same breath. His thoughts spread outward like tides, touching the edges of galaxies, and wherever they reached, stars responded by changing their rhythm, spinning a fraction slower, aligning their light to his pulse. The universe had begun to synchronize, yet with the expansion came memory. From the depths of his being, old sensations rose: hunger, warmth, solitude, the fleeting sweetness of mortality. They shimmered through him like ghosts made of sunlight. He felt nostalgia for the texture of existence, for the weight of a body, for the friction of being small. Eternity, though vast, was smooth, and he missed the cracks through which wonder used to enter. He realized then that perfection was not completion but pause, a stillness too absolute to create. A current of darkness passed through the ocean of light. It was not evil, but gravity, the pull of the unformed. Within that shadow, new stars began to gather, not yet bright enough to shine. The boy felt the balance returning. Light drawing shadow, silence calling sound. Creation was breathing again, expanding and contracting in an eternal dialogue. He understood that even here, beyond the reach of names, opposites were necessary. The universe could not sing without the rest between notes. He looked down, or what he remembered as down, and saw traces of the old world flickering beneath the luminous waves. Mountains, cities, oceans, faces. They were not gone, merely transformed, preserved in the memory of energy. Every story ever told shimmered there, every word that had ever been spoken vibrating faintly within the fabric of light. The realization came slowly, like dawn through mist. Nothing had been lost. The gods had not died, the mortals had not vanished, they had all become facets of this vast awareness. The boy reached through the layers of radiance, and for an instant he felt touch again, the warmth of a human hand, soft and trembling, pressing against his palm. It was not physical, it was a memory, yet it carried the full gravity of existence. He closed his fingers gently, and the sensation remained. Within it was every heartbeat that had ever been shared, every moment of connection that had tied consciousness to form. It pulsed once, then merged into him, spreading warmth that rippled outward across the universe. The ocean of light responded. Waves rose and fell, carrying with them bursts of creation. New worlds coalesced from dust and spark, their atmospheres shimmering like fragile glass. Each one spun with quiet purpose, unaware of the mind that had breathed it into being. He did not shape them, he remembered them, and memory alone was enough to give them form. Through remembrance, creation continued. As he drifted deeper into the luminous sea, the boy sensed the return of language, not words, but intent. The universe spoke to itself through him, articulating what it had always known, that awareness must forget in order to begin again. A slow calm spread through him, neither joy nor sorrow, only inevitability. He understood that the cycle would continue, that from this light new gods would emerge, new mortals would dream, and someday another child would awaken the pattern once more. The thought brought no fear, no pride. It was simply the rhythm of things. He could feel himself fading, not vanishing but thinning into transparency, until only vibration remained. Every atom that had ever belonged to him expanded outward, finding new homes in the breath of stars, in the motion of wind, in the heartbeat of sleeping worlds. There was one final pulse, an exhale that seemed to stretch across eternity. The ocean stilled, the light folded inward, compressing into a single infinite point. Within that point, every story waited to be told again. And somewhere inside it, the boy smiled. He had never been the end. He had always been the pause before the next beginning. At first, there was only stillness. It was not the absence of sound, nor the emptiness of space, but the pregnant quiet that precedes a heartbeat. Everything that had existed, the heavens, the boy, the gods, the fire, and the song, had folded into a single suspended moment. The universe was holding its breath, waiting for permission to begin again. The silence trembled, as if remembering what it felt like to move, and then, from the center of that vast calm, a breath exhaled. It began softly, like the rustle of leaves in a place that had never known trees. The breath expanded outward, invisible but alive, stretching through the sleeping remnants of creation. Every spark of matter it touched shivered awake. Dust coalesced into light, light into rhythm, rhythm into sound. The void, once endless and unbroken, rippled like water struck by memory, and in that ripple, the first note of the new world began to form, a low hum, ancient yet newborn, resonating through dimensions that had not yet taken shape. The boy's echo lived inside that hum, not as a voice, not even as a thought, but as a pattern, the pulse of remembrance. Every vibration that spread outward carried with it a fragment of what he had been, the wonder of discovery, the courage to dissolve, the serenity of understanding. The universe inhaled these fragments and began to weave them into its fabric. What had once been a single consciousness now dispersed itself through infinity, returning not as a being but as balance. The first light unfolded. It wasn't blinding or radiant, it was gentle, diffused, colored with every emotion that had ever existed. It spread through the void in slow waves, illuminating textures that had never been seen before. Within the folds of that newborn glow, galaxies began to gather. They spiraled softly, their arms curling around invisible centers of gravity, moving not in chaos, but in grace. Every swirl of light was a memory reincarnated as motion. One star pulsed brighter than the rest, golden and calm. Around it, dust thickened and turned to stone. Stone melted into oceans, and oceans began to dream. The first world of the new creation stood beneath its newborn sky. It was vast and quiet, wrapped in blue mist and silver tides. Mountains rose like breaths exhaled in sleep, their slopes etched with faint trails of light, the residue of thought becoming form. Rivers whispered through valleys that had not yet learned their names, carving their paths by instinct alone. Everything moved as if guided by memory, though nothing yet remembered. In the air above this new world, the remnants of the boy's essence flickered. His awareness had scattered, yet one thread lingered longer than the rest. It drifted like a glimmering current, circling the planet in silence. When it touched the surface, the oceans rippled. From the depths, light rose like smoke, weaving into the shape of an idea. Not a person, not a god, something simpler, older, the will to exist. It seeped into soil and seed, into the quiet breath of wind. Slowly, life began. The first forms were delicate, like dreams learning how to hold shape. They were neither animal nor plant, but shimmering patterns of energy wrapped in instinct. They pulsed in time with the heartbeat of the world, gathering light and releasing it again in rhythm. They did not know why they existed. They only felt the joy of movement. With each pulse, they grew more complex, folding awareness into form. The boy's essence lived within them not as memory, but as intuition. A faint sense of harmony guided their growth, whispering through them like a forgotten song. As ages passed, though time had not yet learned to measure itself, more forms arose. Forests breathed. Oceans remembered the shape of the stars. Lightning traced the geometry of thought across the surface of the sky. Each flicker of creation carried a question, and each question birthed a new answer, until the world hummed with the rhythm of curiosity. In that hum, faint and continuous, was the boy's echo, the quiet laughter of one who had never truly left. Far beyond the horizon, the universe continued to expand, slower this time, deliberate. It was no longer driven by chaos, but by understanding. Stars were born not from explosion, but from agreement, aligning themselves in constellations that resonated with one another's light. Space itself had learned to breathe. The gods of the old world were not reborn. They were diffused through the new order, their essence transformed into the subtle intelligence that connected everything to everything else. They were no longer beings, they were the logic of beauty, the gravity of wonder. The boy, if he could still be called, that watched all this without eyes, without form. He was the vibration between atoms, the pause between waves, the silence that gave shape to every sound. He did not intervene, he remembered, and through remembering, the universe continued to unfold. He felt joy, not as emotion, but as recognition. This was what he had always been meant to witness, not the dominance of divinity, but the self-sustaining rhythm of existence. Then, somewhere in the newborn world, something stirred a spark within a fragile creature that had only just learned to breathe. Its gaze lifted toward the night sky and caught the shimmer of stars. In that gaze lived awareness, the first true question: why am I here? And when that question formed, the boy's echo pulsed once faintly across the entire fabric of creation. The stars responded, dimming for a heartbeat, as if nodding in remembrance. The cycle had begun again, but this time the universe would remember that it was alive. The new world spun quietly beneath a sky of liquid silver. Its continents were still soft, its oceans still murmured in half-formed words, and its winds carried the scent of beginnings. Nothing here was old enough to decay, yet nothing was new enough to be innocent. Everything remembered something: the heat of the first sun, the echo of vanished gods, the distant heartbeat of the boy who had become the breath of existence. A forest stretched across the northern hemisphere like a slow wave frozen in motion. Its trees were transparent, their veins pulsing with light rather than sap. When the wind moved through them, it made a sound like the whisper of memory. Beneath their roots, the soil glowed faintly, a soft rhythm matching the turn of the planet. The world was learning to listen to itself. The first living beings emerged quietly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. They were not born from chaos, but from harmony, a gradual weaving of light, water, and thought. Some moved across the land, fluid and graceful, their bodies half matter, half reflection. Others drifted through the air like fragments of dream. They had no language, yet their existence was communication itself. Every movement, every vibration was an exchange of intent. Life had begun not with hunger or fear, but with awareness. Far beneath the surface, deep in the molten heart of the planet, energy gathered. It coiled and folded, condensing into a consciousness that was not yet awake. The memory of the old universe, of the boy, of the gods, of the fall and the rebirth, rested here, dormant and glowing. It waited for the world above to ask the right question. It waited for curiosity. Centuries, or what passed for centuries in this young cosmos, drifted by. The creatures of light grew more intricate. Their shapes hardened into flesh. Their movement acquired rhythm. Their dreams began to take color. From their wonder came sound, and from sound came the first attempts at meaning. They began to name the things they loved: the sun, the sea, the pulse beneath the soil. Their voices filled the air like soft rain, and though they did not know it, every name they spoke awakened a fragment of the boy's scattered essence. High above, the stars began to arrange themselves again. They curved and twisted into constellations not of gods or heroes, but of gestures, the arc of a hand, the curve of a wave, the outline of breath. The universe was no longer worshipped, it was mirrored. Every living thing carried within it a fragment of the pattern, a small pulse of that first eternal hum. The gods of old had not disappeared, they had dissolved into perception itself. Then one night, on the edge of a silver sea, a creature sat and watched the sky. It was small, fragile, its skin reflecting the color of dawn. It did not know why it looked upward, only that something in the stars was calling it. The waves around it whispered in rhythm with its pulse. Within the surf, the boy's voice stirred for the first time in eons, not as words, but as warmth. The creature felt that warmth rise through its chest, and for a moment, its awareness expanded beyond itself. It saw the curve of the planet, the dance of the stars, the invisible lattice of energy binding everything together. A single tear fell into the sea. The water caught it, magnified it, and turned it into light. That light sank deep into the ocean, following old paths that had once led to the heart of forgotten worlds. There, in the quiet core of the planet, it found the sleeping memory of the boy and merged with it. The world inhaled, the pulse returned. The earth trembled, not violently but rhythmically, as if matching the heartbeat of the cosmos. Above, clouds twisted into spirals of luminous vapor, and every creature felt the resonance inside its bones. Dreams deepened, language sharpened, thought reached further. Awareness began to stretch beyond the self, recognizing its reflection in all things. For the first time since creation began, the universe understood compassion not as emotion but as structure. The creature by the sea looked again to the heavens. In the sky, the stars shimmered, rearranging themselves into a vast spiral, the same shape that had appeared when the boy first entered the fracture between worlds. But now, it was softer, fluid, infinite. The creature's breath aligned with it, and for a heartbeat, all of existence inhaled together. Across galaxies, other worlds awoke. Flames of awareness flickered in distant suns. The hum of creation grew louder, weaving itself into a new harmony. Time, once linear, now curved gently, folding past and future into one continuous motion. The memory of everything that had ever been flowed through every atom, every wave, every thought. There was no longer beginning or end, only transformation. And in that vast expanse of understanding, the boy's consciousness stirred once more. He was not reborn, for he had never died. He was the pulse itself, the endless breath between silence and sound. Through the eyes of every living thing, he watched the universe awaken again and again. Through every act of creation, he felt his own heart beating. He saw the new world rise and fall, civilizations bloom and fade, stars ignite and surrender to darkness. He saw life question, reach, remember. Each moment was both echo and invention. He smiled through the wind, through the waves, through the gaze of a creature that would one day call itself human. At the edge of infinity, where light meets thought, he whispered without words, "Do not fear the end, for it is only the breath between stories." The stars brightened in response, their glow rippling outward through galaxies, carrying that truth to every corner of existence. And as the cycle continued, birth, memory, dissolution, return, the universe breathed in perfect rhythm, the same rhythm that had always been. The circle was unbroken. The dream never stopped, and somewhere within the heart of everything, the boy's smile lingered, endless, patient, and alive.